Hello, my name is Adland. I am a student of English and I want to share my journey with you. Learning to speak English naturally was not easy for me, but I found ways to improve. Today, I will tell you about 10 tips that helped me. These tips changed my life, and I believe they will help you too. At first, I was scared to speak English. I thought I would make mistakes and people would laugh at me. But then, I realized something important. Mistakes are part of learning. The more I practiced, the more natural my English became. Let me take you on my journey. Listening like a baby. How I started understanding English. Naturally, when I was a child, I never thought about how I learned my first language. It just happened. I listened to my parents talk, I watched their lips move, and I heard their voices every day. I didn't study grammar or memorize vocabulary lists. I didn't worry about making mistakes. I just listened, and slowly I started speaking. I never questioned the process because it felt natural. But when I started learning English, everything was different. I was older, and suddenly I had to follow rules, learn sentence structures, and take tests. I was expected to speak correctly from the beginning, and that pressure made me afraid. Every time I tried to speak, I hesitated. My sentences felt slow and unnatural, and I always second-guessed myself. One day I realized that I had learned my first language in a much easier way, by listening first. That's when I decided to change my approach. At first, I didn't know where to start. I thought about the way babies learn. They hear the same words again and again. They don't understand them at first, but over time, their brain starts recognizing patterns. I wanted to do the same with English. Instead of forcing myself to speak perfectly, I decided to just listen. But I needed to hear real English, not just the slow, unnatural sentences from my textbooks. So, I made a simple change. I started listening to English every single day. I remember the first day I tried this. I was sitting in my room, and I put on a YouTube video of an American talk show. The people were speaking so fast. I could only catch a few words. It felt impossible to understand everything, but I didn't stop. I told myself that it was okay if I didn't understand everything at once. I just needed to listen. So I let the video play while I did other things. At first, it felt like background noise, but after a few days, I started recognizing words and phrases. I heard words like, kind of, actually, over and over again. These were words I had never paid attention to in my English classes. After a few weeks, I noticed something surprising. When I heard those words in conversations, I understood their meaning without translating them in my head. My brain was slowly getting used to the rhythm of English, just like a baby's brain does when learning a language for the first time. That's when I knew I was on the right track. I decided to take my listening practice to the next level. I started listening to English in every part of my day. When I woke up, I played an English podcast while brushing my teeth. On my way to school, I listened to American music. In the evening, I watched TV shows in English, even if I didn't understand everything. I turned my world into an English-speaking environment. One of the biggest challenges was learning to listen without reading subtitles. At first, I always depended on them. My eyes kept looking at the words instead of focusing on the sounds. One day, I challenged myself to watch a short scene from a movie without subtitles. It was difficult, but I noticed something interesting. I was paying more attention to the speaker's tone and expressions. Even though I didn't catch every word, I could still understand the general idea. That moment was a breakthrough for me. I realized that real communication is not just about words. It's about emotions, gestures, and context. I continued my listening practice for months. Slowly, my brain became more comfortable with English sounds. I started picking up phrases without thinking. When I heard native speakers say, "What's up?" or "Let's go," I didn't need to translate the words in my head. I just knew what they meant. It felt natural, just like my first language. One day, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in a cafe and I heard two tourists speaking English at the table next to me. Without even trying, I understood their conversation. It wasn't perfect, but I could follow what they were saying. I wasn't translating. I was just listening and understanding. At that moment, I realized how much I had improved. I had spent so much time listening that English had started to feel natural to me. But then something even bigger happened. The tourists seemed lost, and one of them turned to me and asked, "Excuse me? Do you know where the museum is?" My heart started beating fast. This was my chance to respond in English. But would I be able to do it? Would I freeze up? Would I make mistakes? I knew that my listening practice had helped me understand English, but could I speak it naturally? I took a deep breath. It was time to find out. Speaking without fear. My first attempt. At a real conversation, I sat there frozen for a second. The tourist was looking at me, waiting for an answer. My heart was racing. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for. I had spent months listening to English, filling my mind with words and phrases. I had told myself that I was getting better. But now, when it was time to actually speak, I felt unsure. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head. What if I said something wrong? What if my accent sounded strange? What if I forgot the words? For a brief moment, I considered pretending that I didn't understand English. That would be the easy way out. But then I remembered all those hours of listening, all those times I had heard people speak naturally. I had prepared for this. I had to try. I took a deep breath and spoke. Yes, the museum is, My voice was shaky. I paused, searching for the right words. The tourist waited patiently. I felt embarrassed. But then, something surprising happened. Instead of panicking, I focused on what I knew. I had heard people give directions in English before. I had heard phrases like, go straight, turn left, it's near many times. I just had to put those words together. I took another deep breath and tried again. The museum is near the park. You go straight and turn left. My sentence was simple, but the tourist smiled. Oh, thank you so much, he said. And just like that, I had done it. I had spoken English in a real conversation. At first, I felt relieved that it was over, but then something else happened. I felt excited. I had spoken English. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The other person had understood me. That moment changed everything for me. I realized that the biggest thing stopping me from speaking English wasn't my grammar, my accent, or my vocabulary. It was my fear. For a long time, I had been afraid of making mistakes. I had been afraid of sounding different. But now I saw the truth. People don't care if your English isn't perfect. They just want to communicate. I had spent months listening, and that had helped me understand English naturally. But now, it was time to take the next step. I had to start speaking more, and I had to do it without fear. After that day at the cafe, I made a decision. I was going to practice speaking English every single day, but I had one big problem. I didn't have anyone to practice with. Most of my friends spoke my native language. I didn't know any native English speakers. I felt stuck. But then, I realized something important. Before babies start talking, they practice sounds. They make mistakes. They repeat words. They talk to themselves. And nobody laughs at them. So, I decided to do the same. I started speaking to myself in English. It felt strange at first, but I reminded myself that nobody was listening. I described my day out loud. I am brushing my teeth. Now I am going to school. The weather is nice today. I talked about anything and everything. The more I spoke, the more natural it started to feel. Then I found another way to practice. I started reading English books out loud. At first I read slowly, focusing on pronouncing each word. But over time, I got faster. My tongue got used to English sounds. I realized that speaking wasn't just about knowing the right words. It was about training my mouth to say them naturally, but I still wanted real conversations, so I looked for other ways to practice. I joined an online language exchange group where people from different countries practiced speaking English together. At first, I was nervous. I was afraid of making mistakes in front of others. But then, I remembered my experience at the cafe. I had survived my first real conversation. I could do this too. I started small. I introduced myself. Hello, my name is Adland. I am learning English. The people in the group were friendly. Nobody laughed at my mistakes. They encouraged me. The more I spoke, the more confident I became. One day, I made a big mistake while speaking. I was trying to tell someone that I was excited about learning English, but instead of saying, I am excited, I accidentally said, I am exited. The person looked confused. Then they laughed and said, Oh, you mean excited, not exited. Exited means you left a place. At first I felt embarrassed, but then I laughed too. It was a simple mistake, and I had learned something new. I realized that making mistakes was not the end of the world. In fact, mistakes were a good thing. They helped me learn. After that, I stopped being afraid of errors. I started speaking more freely. As I practiced more, I started looking for opportunities to use English in my daily life. When I went to a store, I greeted the cashier in English. Hello, how are you? When I saw English signs, I read them out loud. I even started thinking in English. Instead of translating everything in my head, I tried to form sentences naturally. One day I went to a restaurant, and the waiter spoke English. Instead of feeling nervous, I felt excited. This was my chance to practice. I ordered my food in English. I would like a sandwich, please. It was such a small moment, but it made me feel proud. Every little step was helping me become more comfortable with English. I also started recording myself speaking. I would talk about my day, record it, and then listen to myself. At first, I didn't like the way I sounded. I noticed my mistakes, but I didn't stop. The more I practiced, the better I got. One evening, I was walking in the park when I saw a woman sitting alone on a bench. She looked lost, checking her phone and looking around. I hesitated, but then I remembered my goal. I wanted to speak English naturally. I gathered my courage and walked up to her. Excuse me, do you need help? She looked up, surprised. Oh, yes, actually. I'm trying to find the train station. I smiled. This was my chance to have a real conversation. The train station is that way. You walk straight for 5 minutes, then turn right. She smiled back. Thank you so much. Are you from here? I felt a small moment of panic. This was more than just giving directions. This was an actual conversation. But I took a deep breath and answered. Yes, I live here. Where are you? From? And just like that, we started talking. I asked her about her trip. She told me about her travels. I didn't think too much about my words. I just spoke. My sentences weren't perfect, but she understood me. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about speaking English. I was just communicating. After she left, I realized something. I had spoken English naturally. I hadn't translated in my head. I hadn't hesitated too much. I had just spoken. That moment gave me confidence. If I could do it once, I could do it again. But I knew that speaking was only one part of learning English naturally. There was something else I needed to do. I needed to make English a real part of my daily life, not just something I practiced in conversations. That's when I discovered another powerful habit that changed everything. Thinking in English, how I stopped translating in my head. After that evening in the park, something changed inside me. For the first time, I had spoken English without overthinking, without fear, without stopping to translate in my head. It had felt natural, but as I walked home, another thought entered my mind. Why did it feel easy this time, but difficult so many other times? I had been learning English for a long time, yet in many situations I still struggled to speak fluently. Sometimes even simple conversations felt slow. I would hear a question, understand it, but then spend too much time thinking about how to answer. I realized what the problem was. I was still translating. Even though I was practicing English every day, my brain still thought in my native language first. Whenever I wanted to say something, I would think of the words in my own language, then try to find the English words to match. It was like carrying a heavy bag on my back while trying to run. By the time I had translated my thoughts, the conversation had already moved forward. I knew that if I really wanted to speak English naturally, I had to stop translating. But how? That night, I sat in my room thinking about the moments when I had spoken English without hesitation, when I gave directions at the cafe, when I ordered food at the restaurant, when I helped the woman in the park. Those moments felt natural because I wasn't thinking too much. I was just responding. I wasn't translating. I was communicating. That was the key. I needed to train my brain to think in English all the time, not just when I was speaking. The next morning, I decided to try something new. As soon as I woke up, instead of thinking in my native language, I tried to think in English. I am waking up. I need to brush my teeth. It looks sunny outside. It felt strange at first. My thoughts were slower. I had to search for the right words. But I didn't stop. As I got ready for the day, I kept going. I am making breakfast. I need a spoon. This tea is hot. I wasn't speaking out loud. I was just thinking. At first, it was difficult. My brain kept trying to switch back to my native language. Some words were easy, but others I didn't know, when I couldn't think. Of a word in English, I didn't let myself translate. Instead, I tried to describe it. If I didn't know the word for pillow, I would think, the soft thing I put my head on. If I forgot the word for fridge, I would say, the cold box where I keep my food. It wasn't perfect, but it helped me keep my thoughts in English. As the days passed, I made it a habit. Every time I saw something, I tried to describe it in English in my head. When I walked outside, I would think, the sky is blue. The trees are tall. There is a red car. When I waited in line at a store, I would imagine conversations in English. If the cashier asks me something, what will I say? I was training my brain to use English automatically, without translating. One evening, I sat down to watch a movie in English. Normally, I would watch with subtitles in my native language. But that day, I decided to turn them off. I wanted to see how much I could understand without translating. At first, it was difficult. My brain wanted to find the meaning of every single word. But then I realized something. When I focused too much on individual words, I missed the bigger picture. So I tried something different. I stopped worrying about every little detail and just listened. I focused on the emotions, the tone of voice, the expressions of the characters. And suddenly, I understood more. I kept practicing. I listened to songs in English and tried to understand the lyrics. I read short articles and reminded myself not to translate. When I didn't understand something, I didn't rush to check a dictionary. Instead, I tried to guess the meaning from the context. It was challenging, but I noticed a big change. English was starting to feel more natural. One day, I was walking through a busy market when I heard two tourists talking. They were speaking fast, and for a second, I thought I wouldn't understand. But then, something surprising happened. Instead of trying to translate their words, I just listened. I didn't catch every word, but I understood what they were talking about. It felt effortless. My brain wasn't working slowly, trying to change each sentence into my native language. It was just understanding. That was the moment I knew. My practice was working. But the real test came a few weeks later. I was sitting in a small cafe, reading an English book, when I heard someone say, "Excuse me? Do you know where the train station is?" I looked up and saw a young man with a backpack. He was speaking English. Without thinking, I answered, "Yes. You walk straight for about 5 minutes, then turn right. The station is next to the big bookstore." He smiled. "Thank you," I smiled back. And then I realized something. I hadn't translated anything. I hadn't thought about grammar. I hadn't hesitated. I had just spoken. My brain had responded in English, naturally and easily. It felt different from before. It felt right. I walked home that day feeling proud. For so long I had thought of English as something I had to study. But now I understood. If I wanted to speak English naturally, I had to live in English. Thinking in English had helped me take another step toward fluency. But I knew there was still more to learn. Speaking without fear and thinking in English were important, but there was something else that could make my English even more natural, learning the rhythm and melody of the language. Copying native speakers, learning natural expressions. After that moment in the cafe, something changed in the way I saw English. I realized that fluency wasn't just about knowing words or grammar, it was about how naturally I could use them. I had stopped translating in my head, but there was still something missing. When I listened to native speakers, they spoke differently. Their words flowed smoothly. Their sentences had rhythm. They used expressions that I didn't learn from textbooks. One day, I was watching an interview with an American actress. She was talking about her childhood and she said, "Oh, I totally freaked out when I lost my backpack." That phrase, "totally freaked out," stuck in my mind. It wasn't something I had learned in school. If I had been in her place, I would have probably said I was very scared. But "totally freaked out" sounded so much more natural. I wanted to speak like that. That night, I decided to try something new. Instead of just listening to English, I would copy the way native speakers talked. I started with short phrases. Whenever I watched a movie or listened to a podcast, I paid attention to how people spoke. When I heard an interesting phrase, I paused and repeated it out loud exactly the way they said it. "That's awesome." "No way." "I can't believe it." I copied their tone, their rhythm, their pronunciation. At first, I felt a little silly talking to myself. But the more I practiced, the more natural it felt. I wasn't just learning words. I was absorbing the language. I realized that English had a certain melody. Some words were stressed more than others. Sentences had a natural up and down flow, and the best way to learn it was to imitate real speakers. One of the best places to do this was at my part-time job in a small coffee shop. Every day I listened to how customers ordered their drinks. One morning, a woman walked in and said, "Can I get a large iced coffee, please?" Her voice was smooth, confident. The words came out quickly, almost like music. I decided to copy her exactly. The next time a customer walked in, I repeated the same structure in my mind. "Can I get a—" It was simple, but it made my English sound more natural. I started paying attention to small details, how people greeted each other, how they responded in conversations. Instead of just saying "I'm fine" when someone asked how I was, I copied what I heard others say. "I'm good, thanks. How about you?" Over time, this habit changed my English completely. I wasn't just speaking correctly, I was speaking naturally. And soon, I would take it a step further by surrounding myself with English every single day. Practicing with real people, overcoming my shyness after I started thinking in English, I felt more confident. But there was still one big problem. I was too shy to speak with real people. I had practiced alone, listened to native speakers, and even talked to myself in English. But when it came to talking to a real person, I froze. My heart would beat fast, my mind would go blank, and I would panic about making mistakes. One day, I realized that if I wanted to speak English naturally, I had to practice with real people, not just in my head. The first time I tried speaking English with a native speaker, I was terrified. It happened at a coffee shop near my school. I had always ordered in my native language before, but that day, I decided to try in English. I walked up to the counter, took a deep breath, and said, "Hello, can I have a cappuccino, please?" The barista smiled and said, "Sure. What size?" For a second, I panicked. I had practiced ordering drinks in my head many times, but I wasn't ready for follow-up questions. I quickly thought and answered, medium. When I got my drink, I felt so proud. It was a small conversation, but it was my first real interaction in English. It wasn't perfect, but I had spoken without giving up. After that, I started looking for more chances to practice speaking with real people. At first, I kept my conversations short and simple. I would ask for directions, order food, or make small talk with shopkeepers. Every time I spoke, I felt a little more confident. One day, I decided to try something more challenging. I went to a language exchange event where people practiced different languages. I met a girl named Sophia who was learning my native language. She wanted to practice, and I needed to practice English, so we became language partners. At first, I was nervous, but Sophia was kind and patient. When I made mistakes, she didn't laugh or judge me. Instead, she encouraged me to keep talking. The more I practiced, the more I realized something important. People don't care if your English isn't perfect. They just want to understand you. At the beginning of my journey, I thought that I had to speak like a native speaker to have a conversation. But I was wrong. Even when I made mistakes, people understood me. They were patient. They listened. They responded. I also started noticing something funny. Sometimes, native speakers made mistakes too. They used informal grammar, shortened words, and spoke casually. That's when I realized fluency isn't about perfection. It's about confidence. Over time, I started feeling more comfortable speaking in English. I stopped overthinking. I stopped worrying about grammar in the middle of a conversation. Instead, I focused on communication, on expressing my thoughts clearly. One day, I was in a bookstore when a woman asked me, "Do you know where the best travel books are?" Without thinking too much, I answered, "Yes, they are in that section." "I love travel books too," she smiled and said, "Oh, really? Where do you want to travel?" And just like that, I had a full conversation in English. Speaking with real people helped me understand something that changed my whole journey. The best way to learn a language is to use it. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. It doesn't matter if your pronunciation isn't perfect. What matters is that you try. The more I spoke, the more natural my English became. Conversations no longer felt like a test. They felt like a normal part of my life. 6. Using English. Every day, how I made English a part of my life, surrounding myself with English had changed the way I thought, but I knew that wasn't enough. I needed to use English actively every single day. It had to become a part of my routine, not just something I listened to or watched. I had improved a lot by copying native speakers and making English part of my environment, but I still felt nervous when I had to speak with real people. I told myself, if I don't start using English now, I never will. So I made a plan. Every single day, I would find a way to use English, no matter how small. I would not let a day go by without speaking, writing, or thinking in English. The first thing I did was talk to myself out loud more often. I was already thinking in English, but now I wanted to practice actually speaking. When I was getting ready in the morning, I described everything I was doing. "I'm brushing my hair. I need to leave in 10 minutes. Where are my shoes?" It felt strange at first, but soon it became a habit. Next, I started writing in English every day. I didn't write long essays or complicated sentences, just simple things. At the end of each day, I wrote a few sentences about what happened. Today was a busy day at work. A customer asked for a recommendation and I helped her choose a coffee. She was very happy. Writing helped me organize my thoughts in English, and it made speaking easier. But I still needed real conversations. So, I joined an online English-speaking group. At first, I just listened to the conversations. I was too shy to say much, but after a few days, I forced myself to speak. My voice was shaky, and I made mistakes, but nobody laughed at me. In fact, they encouraged me. I realized that speaking English wasn't about being perfect. It was about communicating. At work, I became braver. Instead of just greeting customers in English, I started small conversations. When someone ordered a coffee, I asked, "How's your day going?" Or, "Do you have any fun plans for the weekend?" These were simple questions, but they helped me build confidence. I also started texting in English with friends I met online. I didn't worry about using perfect grammar. I just typed the way I would speak. It felt natural, and it helped me think in English even faster. One of the biggest changes happened when I started keeping an English-only hour every evening. For 1 full hour, I only spoke, read, and listened to English. I turned off my native language completely. This small habit made a huge difference. My brain started to process English more quickly, and I felt less afraid to use it. The more I used English every day, the easier it became. My confidence grew, and I started feeling like an English speaker, not just a student of English. And then something happened that changed everything. I made my first real English-speaking friend. Making mistakes and learning from them using. English every day had made me feel more confident, but there was still one thing that scared me: making mistakes. Every time I spoke with a native speaker, I worried about saying the wrong word or using incorrect grammar. I wanted to sound perfect, but trying to be perfect made me too afraid to speak freely. One day, I was talking to my new English-speaking friend, Emily. She was kind and patient, and I felt comfortable practicing with her. We were at a cafe, and I wanted to tell her that I was very tired because I had worked late the night before. But instead of saying, "I worked late last night," I said, "I worked late last night." Emily smiled and said, "Oh, you mean last night?" I felt my face turn red. I had made a simple mistake, and I wanted to disappear. But Emily didn't laugh or make fun of me. She just corrected me gently and kept the conversation going. That moment made me realize something important. Mistakes are not the end of the world. From that day on, I decided to stop being afraid of mistakes. Instead, I paid attention to them and learned from them. Every time someone corrected me, I repeated the correct phrase in my head a few times. If I made the same mistake again, I didn't feel bad. I just reminded myself of the right way to say it. At work, I had another embarrassing moment. A customer asked me if a certain coffee was sweet. I wanted to say, "Yes, it's a little sweet." But instead, I said, "Yes, it's a sweet little." The customer looked confused for a second, then smiled and said, "Oh, you mean a little sweet?" I laughed and nodded. This time, instead of feeling embarrassed, I told myself. Now I will never forget the correct way to say it. I also started keeping a mistake journal. Every time I noticed a mistake I had made, I wrote it down along with the correct version. Instead of feeling frustrated, I treated my mistakes like little lessons. Over time, I noticed that I was making fewer mistakes, and when I did make them, I didn't panic. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that even native speakers make mistakes. Emily once said, "Me and my friend went to the store." Then she laughed and corrected herself, "Oh, wait, it should be my friend and I went to the store." That made me realize that mistakes are normal for everyone, not just language learners. By making mistakes and learning from them, I became a better English speaker. I no longer felt frozen when I spoke. I was able to express myself freely, even if I wasn't perfect. And because of this, something amazing happened. I started feeling confident enough to share my thoughts and opinions in English conversations. Finding a language partner, the power of real conversations. After I stopped being afraid of making mistakes, something changed. I felt freer when I spoke, and I could express myself better. But I realized that I was still mostly talking to myself. I had small conversations at work and texted in English. But I needed something more. I needed someone who would talk with me regularly, a language partner. I had already met Emily, my first real English-speaking friend, but she was not a language learner like me. She was patient and kind, but I knew she couldn't always correct my mistakes or help me practice specific things. I needed someone who was learning just like me, someone I could practice with every day. I started looking online for English speaking partners. There were websites and apps where people from different countries connected to practice languages. I was nervous at first. What if they judged me? What if they didn't understand me? But I reminded myself, making mistakes is part of learning. One day, I connected with a girl named Sophia from Brazil. She was also learning English, and we both wanted to practice speaking. Our first conversation was awkward. We didn't know what to say, and there were long pauses. But instead of giving up, we made a plan. Every day, we would talk for at least 15 minutes in English. At first, we only talked about simple things: what we ate for breakfast, what we did that day, our favorite movies. But soon, our conversations became more natural. We laughed, we shared stories, and we even corrected each other's mistakes. When she used the wrong verb tense, I helped her. When I pronounced a word incorrectly, she helped me. Having a language partner made speaking feel normal. It was no longer something I did only when I needed to. It became part of my daily life. I stopped hesitating before speaking, and I started thinking faster in English. One of the biggest benefits of having a language partner was that I learned real conversation skills. Before, I had only practiced set phrases or sentences from books, but with Sophia, I had to react naturally. If she told me about her weekend, I had to respond the way a real friend would, not the way a textbook would. Little by little, my English improved. I became better at expressing emotions, asking follow-up questions, and keeping conversations flowing. One day, Emily noticed the change. She said, "Wow, Adland, your English sounds so natural now. You're not just speaking, you're really communicating." That was when I knew I had reached a new level. Speaking English was no longer something I practiced. It was something I lived. But I wasn't done yet. Now that I had a language partner, I needed to challenge myself even more. That's when I made a bold decision. I would start thinking and dreaming completely in English. Using body language and facial expressions, having a language partner changed everything for me. Speaking with Sophia every day made English feel like a natural part of my life. But even though my words were improving, I still felt that sometimes something was missing. One day, I noticed something interesting while watching a video of native speakers. They weren't just using words. They were using their whole bodies to communicate. Their hands moved when they spoke. Their faces showed emotions. Even when they didn't say much, their expressions and gestures made their meaning clear and strong. I realized that this was something I hadn't been doing. When I spoke English, I focused only on my words. I kept my hands still. My face stayed neutral. I wasn't using body language the way native speakers did. Then, something funny happened. One afternoon, I had a video call with Sophia. We were talking about our favorite foods, and I wanted to tell her how much I loved pizza. So I smiled and said, "I love pizza so much." Sophia laughed and said, "I can hear it in your voice, but I can't see it in your face." I didn't understand at first. "What do you mean?" I asked. She grinned. "You said you love pizza. But you look serious. If you really love pizza, show it." I looked at myself in the camera and realized she was right. My words said one thing, but my face didn't match. It was as if my emotions were hidden behind my language skills. That day, I made a decision. I would start using my face, hands, and body to help me express myself in English. I started by practicing in front of a mirror. It felt a little silly at first, but it helped me see what native speakers did. I would, say a sentence like, "I'm so excited," and make sure my face looked excited. I would say, "I'm confused," and raise my eyebrows, just like English speakers did. I noticed that emotions like happiness, sadness, surprise, and confusion all had clear facial expressions. Native speakers didn't just use words, They use their faces to add meaning. So I started doing the same. When I talked to Emily, I smiled more when I was happy. When I was surprised, I widened my eyes. When I didn't understand something, I raised my eyebrows and tilted my head, just like native speakers did. It made a big difference. Conversations became more natural and more fun. People could understand me better, even when my words weren't perfect. Next, I focused on using my hands when I spoke. I noticed that English speakers use their hands a lot, even for small things. When they talked about something big, they spread their hands wide. When they counted, they used their fingers. When they explained something, they pointed or moved their hands to show meaning. I had never done this before. In my native language, we didn't use hand movements as much, but I realized that in English, gestures made the conversation feel alive and dynamic. So I started practicing. When I said, "It was this big," I stretched my hands apart. When I said, "I don't know," I lifted my shoulders and turned my palms up. When I described a journey, I moved my hand like I was drawing a path in the air. At first, it felt unnatural, but soon it became a habit. I wasn't just speaking English. I was expressing myself fully. The biggest change happened at work. Before, I sometimes felt nervous when talking to customers. My hands would stay still and my face would be blank. But when I started using body language, something magical happened. I looked more confident, even when I didn't feel that way inside. One day, a customer asked me for a recommendation. Instead of just saying, "This one is good," I smiled, pointed at the product, and gestured as I spoke. The customer immediately trusted my words. I realized that using body language and facial expressions made me look and sound more natural. It wasn't just about words. It was about communication. Even with my language partner, Sophia, our conversations became more expressive. When we talked about funny moments, we laughed and used our hands to act them out. When we shared serious stories, our faces showed the emotion behind our words. By using facial expressions and gestures, I didn't just improve my English, I became a better communicator. But there was still one final step in my journey. Now that I could express myself, naturally I wanted to sound more like a native speaker. That's when I started focusing on intonation and rhythm, how English actually sounds in real conversations. Enjoying the process. How I made learning fun after. Learning how to use body language and facial expressions, I felt more natural when speaking English. Conversations became easier and people understood me better, even when my words weren't perfect. But there was one thing left to master. I wanted to enjoy learning English, not just see it as something I had to do. In the beginning, learning English felt like a serious task. I treated it like homework, something I had to get through. I studied grammar rules, memorized vocabulary lists, and listened to lessons. But sometimes I felt frustrated. It was hard to stay motivated. Then I asked myself, what if learning English didn't feel like work? What if it felt like fun? I decided to change the way I learned. Instead of treating English like a subject, I would make it a part of my life in an enjoyable way. The first thing I did was turn my learning into a game. Instead of memorizing words, I started playing word association games. If I learned the word ocean, I would think of words like waves, blue, and beach. This helped me remember new vocabulary faster and made learning feel more like a challenge than a chore. I also played language apps that turned learning into a fun activity. These apps had daily goals, rewards, and challenges. It felt like I was playing a video game while improving my English. And when I wanted to test my skills, I played a game with myself. I would pick a random object in my room and describe it out loud in English. It was a simple exercise, but it made me think in English while having fun. Before, I thought watching TV in English was just for fun, not for learning. But when I started watching my favorite shows in English, I realized it was one of the best ways to improve. At first, I used subtitles in my native language. Then I switched to English subtitles. Finally, I tried watching without subtitles at all. It was a challenge, but I loved it. I wasn't just studying English. I was enjoying stories, laughing at jokes, and learning naturally. One of my favorite moments was when I watched a comedy show and understood a joke without translating it in my head. I laughed at the same time, as the native speakers. That's when I knew I was really improving. I also started exploring hobbies in English. Instead of reading books in my native language, I tried reading simple English books. Instead of listening to my usual music, I listened to English songs and looked up the lyrics. One day, I decided to try cooking using an English recipe. At first, I worried I wouldn't understand all the instructions, but I took my time, looked up words I didn't know, and followed the steps carefully. When I finished, I felt so proud, not just because I had made a delicious meal, but because I had learned something new in English. The most important thing I learned was to not take mistakes too seriously. Before, I was afraid of saying the wrong word or using bad grammar. But as I started enjoying the process, I realized that mistakes were a natural part of learning. Once, I was talking to my language partner, Sophia, and I accidentally said, "I am boring," instead of "I am bored." She burst out laughing and said, "You're not boring. You're just confused." Instead of feeling embarrassed, I laughed too. Moments like this helped me feel more relaxed. Learning English was not about being perfect. It was about having fun and improving little by little. By making learning enjoyable, I stopped thinking of English as a challenge and started seeing it as a part of my life. I wasn't just studying English, I was living it, and that's when I truly felt natural while speaking. Now, I don't just use English to communicate. I use it to connect with people, enjoy new experiences, and express myself confidently. If you want to speak English naturally, don't just study it. Have fun with it. Because when you enjoy the process, fluency comes naturally.